Welcome to a new Boxscore Geeks segment. We're going to be doing top 10 lists, hopefully weekly, but you'll see what's happening. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. You're going to notice me reading off a script here in a second. That's fine. Let's get in. All right. So today we're going to be talking about teams that stumble onto wins. Getting players that rack up wins is key for success in the NBA. And sometimes shrewd and savvy franchises, like the Spurs with Greg Popovich or the Celtics of old with Red Auerbach, run a tight ship and control their own destinies. However, sometimes teams just, luck into wins. A top player, for whatever reason, is on the market and just falls into their lap. And with that top player, success follows. So this week, I'll be going over our top 10 examples of this. All right, let's get on to the rules. First off, we're going to be leaving draft picks off the list. Draft picks in general, there's a lot of hindsight bias. It's really obvious a great player was great after we've seen them, but it's just too impossible to know. There's just too much noise in the draft. Plus, drafts in general, it's just always unfair. It's always a cheat code for a team to get a young prospects for next to nothing in terms of cost. But don't worry. We're looking at doing our own list about, draft picks and, luck in the draft. So look for that in a future show. We're just going to have to admit up front that there's going to be a modern bias in our list. We're definitely fans of the box score, and the completed box score wasn't around until 1978. Now, for this list, that's not actually a really big deal because it turns out the NBA didn't really have the modern restricted free agency and free agency rules until the late 70s, and, even most of these weren't implemented until the 80s. So it's not a big deal for this list, but, we'd figure we'd let you know why players from the 60s and mostly from the 70s aren't really on it. We're looking for an example of a team gaining a lot of success, making the finals, lots of wins. So that means that, players that only went for a season or so, we're probably going to exclude for the most part. And obviously future moves that we haven't had a chance to see how they pan out, like Kevin Durant to the Warriors, which just happened this offseason, going to be left off the list. Finally, this seems kind of obvious. We're only going for single players on this list. When I was doing research, I really couldn't find any deals where there were multiple players that I would consider were contained in a single trade or a single, signing. Signing wouldn't even make sense for that case. So I didn't include any multiplayers on this, but if I happen to miss any, let me know in the comments. With that, let's get to what every top 10 list needs, some honorable mentions. Side note, our producer, Brian, basically said it's really a top 12 list. No, these are honorable mentions. All right, first honorable mention is Adrian Dantley to the Utah Jazz in 1979. So in 1977, as a rookie, Adrian Dantley averaged over 20 points a game on great shooting. Inexplicably, he ended up on the Lakers mid-season his sophomore year and again had great output. In fact, according to our numbers, he led the NBA in wins produced in 1978. Now, in his third season, he did have a slight setback, missing over 20 games and seeing a production decrease. So inexplicably, the Los Angeles Lakers decided to trade him for a 30-year-old Spencer Haywood. Now, Dantley would go on to be one of the best scorers of the 1980s, where he was utterly wasted in Utah. Spencer Haywood only lasted a season in Los Angeles. Now, just imagine if Kareem and Magic had been next to Dantley from the get-go. Basically, imagine if they'd had James Worthy 5 seasons early. Now, this definitely qualifies as a stumble, as the Lakers just gifted one of the best young talents. As I mentioned, he was leading the league in wins his third season. And to add insult to injury, Dantley's amazing skills were just wasted in Utah because the rest of that team was horrible, and it's probably one of the reasons it took him forever to end up in the Hall of Fame. Anyway, good honorable mention, Adrian Dantley. Our second honorable mention is James Harden to the Houston Rockets in 2012. $4 million. That's really all this boiled down to. After he made it to the finals with the Thunder in the 2012 and was one of the best scorers in the league, it really seemed obvious that the Thunder were set to be a dynasty with Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Serge Ibaka. Sadly, they ran into some contract disputes with Harden wanting, and we'd argue, deserving the max, and the Thunder, as far as I can tell, wanting to be stupid. The Rockets were able to swoop in and pry James Harden away for a song. James Harden would go on to be one of the greats in Houston and, actually was runner-up MVP to Steph Curry. The Thunder, as luck would have it, didn't go away completely empty-handed. One of the picks that the Rockets traded for him turned into Steven Adams, and he's been playing pretty good for the Thunder, so not a complete loss. On to the main list. Number 10, Dikembe Mutombo to the Atlanta Hawks in 1996. In 5 seasons with the Nuggets, Dikembe earned 3 All-Star berths, a Defensive Player of the Year award, and was part of one of the most iconic upsets in NBA playoffs history. This was against the Seattle Supersonics. It was the first example of a number 8 seed defeating a number 1 seed. He wanted to re-sign with the Denver Nuggets and wanted a decade-long commitment. Not really a bad, request as far as I could see. The Nuggets just wouldn't commit, and he wound up on the Hawks, where he went on to earn 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards. Bickerstaff, who was the GM of the Nuggets, says it was his only regret, which that's kind of funny given how bad those Nuggets were, but that's an understatement if you ask me. All right, number 9, Andre Iguodala. I'm going to cheat here and include both the Nuggets in 2012 and the Warriors in 2013. I know I said I wasn't going to do single season, but because I'm including the Warriors, I feel this is justified. Andre Iguodala joined the Nuggets and helped the team to a franchise 57 wins. And then he went to the Warriors, where he also helped them to a franchise wins in 73, as well as a title the season before. Now, in 2012, the 76ers decided to start their rebuilding process. Side note, it's the start of the 2017 season, and as far as I can tell, they're still a few seasons away from making the playoffs, so we'll see how that rebuilding goes. Anyway, in one of the most complicated deals in NBA history, the Lakers turned Andrew Bynum into Dwight Howard. So the Orlando Magic, who started with Dwight Howard, managed to end up with a bunch of assets. The 76ers managed to end up with Andrew Bynum. And the Nuggets, who had no reason being in the trade, that's why I'm considering this a stumble, they managed to end up with Andre Iguodala, who I argue was probably the best player in the deal, given that Andrew Bynum and Dwight Howard both had injuries and really underperformed on the team they end up on. I'm excluding, of course, Dwight Howard on the Rockets in this one. All right. Andre Iguodala then decided he wanted to play for the Warriors, and despite the Warriors not really having the cap or any real flexibility to make it work, somehow him and his agents managed to work out a deal and end up on the Warriors, where he ended up Finals MVP. So there you go. One of the biggest stumbles for 2 franchises, both of whom ended up with a franchise number of wins, thanks to one of the most underappreciated players in NBA history, Andre Iguodala. Number 8, Moses Malone to the Philadelphia 76ers in 1982. So in 1982, Moses Malone had just won his 2nd MVP award. And the Houston Rockets had his restricted free agent rights, and they decided he wasn't in their plans. So when the 76ers offered him $2 million a year, the Rockets said, no, they didn't want to match, which just seems inexplicably crazy. Imagine if the Oklahoma City Thunder decided they didn't want to match Kevin Durant going to the Warriors this season if they'd had that ability. So he joined up with Dr. J and Mo Cheeks and formed one of the best teams in NBA history, the infamous Fo that did go on to win a title. Of course, it was in 4 games, 5 games, and 4 games, not 4-4-4. But anyway, what is it about NBA franchises letting marquee bigs walk out the door? Spoiler alert, he's not the last one on the list. Now, let's get to number 7. Pau Gasol to the Los Angeles Lakers in 2008. Now, if you're a conspiracy theorist, this one might not really be luck, but if you take it at face value, it definitely has to count. In 2008, the Lakers were definitely starting to slip. After Shaq had left in 2004, they missed the playoffs and then actually managed to be one of the few teams at the time to blow a 3-1 lead in the NBA playoffs. We're coming off the 2016 playoffs. How nuts was this year with all those upsets? So anyway, the Lakers were finally starting to look good again with a young Andrew Bynum playing well. But then the killer exchange came. The Lakers got Pau Gasol in exchange for Kwame Brown? So anyway, 3 consecutive finals and 2 titles later, and it's hard to say the Lakers weren't extremely lucky for this move. Where they at now, maybe they don't feel the same way, but definitely one of the luckiest moves in NBA history. Now on to number 6. LeBron James to the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2014. Now, certainly we could probably count LeBron James to Miami earlier, but I'm not really going to count it, as Pat Riley had Dwayne Wade, who was an MVP caliber player, Chris Bosh, another top star. He was already a playoff team before he joined it, and Miami is a tax-free market, and it's Miami. So I don't really consider that being really an underdog or lucky on Pat Riley's part. However, LeBron James going back to Cleveland has to be one of the luckiest things in NBA history. So he had already had a Hall of Fame career with Cleveland from 2003 to 2010. But when he left, a couple of bridges were burned. A comically bad letter from owner Dan Gilbert had analysts like myself absolutely convinced that LeBron would never go back to Cleveland. And yet, somehow he did. A hilarious cameo in the movie Trainwreck, 2 finals and a title later, and I guess it's all water under the bridge. Lucky for Cleveland fans, to say the least. Number 5, Dr. J to the Philadelphia 76ers in 1976. So Dr. J was the ABA. The ABA was, of course, the now defunct rival franchise or rival league that competed against the NBA in the 70s. So he was already coming back off of back-to-back title runs with the New York Nets and was the reigning ABA MVP. And he really should have turned the New Jersey Nets, I think at the time, New York Nets, into something special. Sadly, by joining the NBA, the Nets from the ABA were really hurt. The Nets owed the Knicks $5 million for invading their territory. They also owed fees to join the NBA. And because of that, the owner, Roy, I think it's Bo, decided he wasn't able to afford Dr. J's services. A boneheaded move, to say the least. So the 76ers were able to pick up Dr. J's $3 million contract in exchange for basically paying the Nets $3 million. So $6 million for, at the time, the best player in the ABA and one of the best players in the NBA. No brainer, right? And also the 76ers were doubly lucky to end up with the doctor's services, as the Nets actually went up to the Knicks and said if they ignored that territory fine, that $5 million, they would give them the rights to Dr. J's contract. The Knicks passed on this inexplicably. So current 76ers fans, you may want to remember how lucky you once were. All right. Number 4, Ben Wallace to the Detroit Pistons in 2000. So in 2000, the Pistons were losing one of the best players in the NBA in Grant Hill. People may forget this, but at one point in his career, Grant Hill actually earned more All-Star votes than Michael Jordan. Now, in classic NBA etiquette, when you acquire another team's star, you typically would do a sign and trade. This is past before recent CBAs. You do a sign and trade, so the star player gets a max contract, the new team ends up with a star, and the old team gets, some kind of parting gift, usually a role player or a draft pick, just to make sure, no hard feelings. We know we signed your star away from you, but they wanted to leave and you don't get nothing. So the Pistons were offered Ben Wallace, and oh boy, did that turn out. Ben Wallace went on to win 4 Defensive Player of the Year award and was a huge cornerstone of a Pistons team that made 6 consecutive Eastern Conference Finals, back-to-back finals, and got a title in 2004. Now, to make it even doubly lucky, Grant Hill had nagging injuries and just never returned to his NBA form. So the Pistons actually got the better of this deal, which at the time had to feel like losing one of the best players in the NBA. All right, on to the medal round, I guess. Number 3, Shaquille O'Neal to the Los Angeles Lakers in 1996. So if you haven't seen the fantastic 30 for 30 on the subject, just stop and go watch. There's a fantastic 30 for 30 on the Orlando Magic, Shaquille O'Neal, and Penny Hardaway. It's fantastic. Go check it out. I'll wait. So anyway, the Orlando Magic seemed blessed as an expansion team. First, they lucked into one of the greatest centers ever in the 1992 draft, and then they lucked into one of the most versatile point guards in the very next draft in Penny Hardaway. But then they lost a finals where they were the heavy favorites against the Houston Rockets, and everything kind of started falling apart there. The Magic decided to play hardball with Shaq, and behind the scenes, Jerry Buss and Jerry West from the Los Angeles Lakers were doing their darndest to try and get Shaquille O'Neal on the team. By the time the Magic finally got their heads on straight, Shaq was headed to the Lakers to play with a promising high schooler named Kobe Bryant. Now, I give the Lakers a ton of credit for this move. There was a lot of really smart cat maneuvering, a lot of jostling, whatever, but it counts as luck, as Shaq should never have even been on the market. Really, the Magic should have just gone up to Shaq, offered him a max deal, and moved on. He never should have been on the market. So one of the luckiest deals in NBA history for the Los Angeles Lakers. In a surprise twist, number 2 also goes to Los Angeles Lakers. Number 2 is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Los Angeles Lakers in 1975. Milwaukee arguably lucked into Kareem in the I forget which draft, but in the NBA draft. The ABA had been courting Kareem really hard, but they decided to play hardball. And so when Kareem was able to decide between going to the ABA and the NBA, he decided to go with the NBA and ended up in Milwaukee. And, with the Bucks, Kareem was magical. He earned multiple MVPs and a title with Oscar Robertson. But after the Big O retired, Kareem decided Milwaukee just wasn't for him. As a side note, it's 2016, and the Bucks GM admitted that Milwaukee has some major issues with racism. So it's not really a shock that in the 1970s, Kareem really didn't want to live there. So Kareem asked to be traded to either New York or Los Angeles. And in an even luckier move for the Lakers, the Bucks decided to reject offers from, the New York Knicks that included Walt Frazier. So they decided to go with the classic mistake of trading for youth and draft picks instead of trading for a bona fide star. So the Lakers traded a bunch of young players that never turned anything and got one of the best players in NBA history who would end his career as the NBA's leading scorer. Just talk about lucky. All right, number 1, Dennis Rodman to the Chicago Bulls in 1995. So the Bulls looked like they were on the downhill slide. First, they lost Michael Jordan to retirement, and then Horace Grant left them to play with Orlando on that team that, as we mentioned, got upset in the finals. Now, as luck would have it, Michael Jordan decided that he was back and re-signed with the Bulls, but they weren't quite there. They were missing that big. And according to Phil Jackson's biography, he had 10 names on a list that he wanted to fill, that he could see potentially filling that big role, and number 10 happened to be Dennis Rodman. However, Dennis Rodman had some major friction with the Spurs front office, and so he ended up on the trading block. So in a take-it-now move, the Bulls managed to end up with one of the most prolific rebounders in NBA history. Rodman joined Michael and Pippen to form the ultimate Big Three, and from 1996 to 1998, the Bulls went over 200 games, 3 consecutive titles, and, Dennis Rodman had league-leading rebound numbers, and was a lockdown defender, which was a huge part of that. And he, as I mentioned, kind of similar to other things, he really shouldn't have been on the market, but, friction with the Spurs. And it's even luckier that had it not been perfect timing, the Bulls might have had one of their other names on the list. So one of the greatest franchises in NBA history and arguably one of the top players on it has to be number 1 on the list. All right, that was a lot of fun. Did you agree with my picks? Did I leave any names off? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time. Check out boxscoregeeks.com for more lists like that and more sports analysis if that's your thing. Thanks again.